Innotribe. Please welcome CEO and founder of Intersect, Jay Van Zel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the last session of the day for talking about machines and the importance of those intelligent machines in our lives going into the future. So we've heard about most of today around how analytics and artificial intelligence and how robotics are going to change our lives over time. And I think that we get so used to the fact that machines are embedded in our lives every single day. We think about our pockets, we have our money that's been digital, our car keys that's becoming digital, our phones that are digital. Our entire lives are immersed in this entire digital experience and in automation, and we're connected on the internet almost permanently. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hear from somebody that's got an interesting opinion, and I think that I've been following Andrew's work for the last while, and I think that it's really worth listening to. So I would like to introduce to you Andrew Keane to close up for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Jay. When he said interesting, you should put inverted commas around that, meaning maybe not all of you will like what you hear, although some of you may. Sometimes the message, well, McLuhan famously said, the medium is the message, but of course it's more complicated than that. You guys are all in the medium, so for you the message is sometimes a bit more complicated than the one that we normally associate with this technology. So I've written a book called, which was out at the beginning of the year. I hope you will have a chance to read it. The Internet is Not the Answer. Now that title sounds as if it's an anti-technology book, an anti-internet book, but it isn't in a way. It's a book about the mistakes we're making about technology, but the mistakes we're making about technology aren't about the technology itself, it's about us. So when we critique the internet, which I'm going to do, or at least certain elements of digital society, I'm not critiquing technology, I'm not against technology. I have to always say this in these kind of speeches, particularly in a techie audience like this, because otherwise I get dismissed, rightly I think, as a Luddite, as someone who wants to turn the clock back, who says we can go back to the certainties of the analog age. We can go back to the horse and cart, or industrialization, or CDs or DVDs or whatever other certainties that used to exist. I don't believe we can. And I think events like this are excellent in the sense that they talk about the unavoidability of the future. The future is the network. The future is the Internet of Things. The future is Bitcoin and blockchain and all these other technologies and peer-to-peer technologies which are changing the world. So the future is unavoidable. The future is inevitable, but there isn't a singular future. There isn't one future. There are a series of options, and we ourselves have to choose which future we want. Just as if we were here at the beginning of the 19th century, industrialization was a certainty. It was inevitable. It would have been fairly self-evident then with the birth of factories, but the kind of society, the kind of economy, the kind of political economy that industrialization would have spawned wasn't inevitable. There were lots of different options. Some worked out better than others. Some were more successful. We're at a similar moment, I think, in the development, in the evolution of digital society. This is a great transformation, one of the two great transformations of the last couple of 100 years. Eric Bryn-Johnson and Andrew McAfee of MIT wrote a very good book called The Second Machine Age. I think that book has been referred to here. I think those guys maybe even spoke at one of these events in the past. We are living through a revolution of enormous significance, a digital revolution which is transforming every industry from media to transportation to education to healthcare, even politics, and of course, finance, an industry which most of you, I assume, are in. FinTech now is one of the hottest of new things in London, in Berlin, and of course in Silicon Valley, where I'm from. So technology is transforming everything. The old world, the old certainties are being what in Silicon Valley is called disrupted. Disruption has become the orthodoxy. If you don't use the word disruption, you're square. unless, of course, you actually work for Square. And I guess, in a sense, I'm Square because I question this very idea of disruption, or at least I question some of the consequences of disruption. Now, you've heard, Peter told me, he said to me, I have an opportunity to close this conference on an optimistic note. That was a joke. But I've heard from Peter and from others who have been in these sessions that throughout this week you've been hearing about how technology is going to change everything for the better. You've heard then about Bitcoin. You've heard about these peer-to-peer technologies that will change everything. You've heard about social media. You've heard about artificial intelligence. You've heard about the Internet of Things. You've heard how all these technologies are going to solve the core problems of society, create jobs, create value, create opportunity, democratize, empower. Now, in my book, The Internet is Not the Answer, I tell the history of the Internet. By the way, the word the Internet, I think, is a rather archaic word. I like the title because it's catchy, and I certainly like that yellow cover, but I'm not so keen on the word the Internet, because when we think of the Internet, we think of clunky computers. We think of devices. We think even of these sorts of things which we all now carry around in our pocket. But the Internet, of course, today, or what we call the Internet, is becoming increasingly ubiquitous. It's certainly not really desktops or laptops or iPads anymore. It may not even be smartphones. It will be embedded in walls. It's smart cities. It's self-driving cars. It's the Internet of Things, which supposedly will have 50 billion devices, connected devices by 2020. In other words, it's the next stage, the real revolution when it comes to Moore's law and intelligent devices. It won't, by the way, be these Doctor Who-like computers that roll around that look like sophisticated vacuum cleaners. The Internet is ubiquitous. It's like electricity. It's everywhere and everything. It will power everywhere and everything and everyone. And indeed, I think in the not-too-distant future, we'll be ingesting digital devices. They'll be inside us. They get closer and closer and closer. First we had the desktop, then we had the laptop, then we had iPads, then we had smartphones. Now we've got these wristwatches and other devices we wear, but soon they'll be infiltrating us. So it's everywhere, it's everything, and as I said, it's changing every industry. You need to look at Uber with its $50 billion valuation, and its impact on transportation, Airbnb's impact on hospitality, the radical revolution now in education, and Khan Academy, and all these other startups that are changing the nature of teaching and education, healthcare, fintech, and so on and so forth. So this is the big story. It's the thing that's defining not only perhaps the early part of the 21st century, but the whole century. It offers, it challenges, it changes everything. It's the core disruption of our age. So the question, of course, is it the answer? And then some of you will say, well, what does that mean? The Internet is not the answer. What's the question? And the question is the Internet working as what I would call the operating system for 21st century life? Is it solving the problems? Is it living up to its promise? Because as I explain in the book, in the chapters where I tell the history of the Internet, much was promised. And it was the same kind of promises that you've been hearing this week. The promises about empowerment, the promises of cultural enrichment, the promises of great wealth for many entrepreneurs, the promise of an enormously new, exciting opportunity for all of us. There was even a guy called J.C.R. Licklider, who was one of the most influential figures in the beginnings of the Internet, who talked about something called the computer-human symbiosis, that it would enrich the human condition, that by somehow becoming part of machines, it would make us better, more powerful, richer. So in my book, I say, okay, well, those were big promises. Those were things that were clear, that they were laying down the gauntlet. They were saying, this is the solution. This is what's going to make human beings happier, richer, better off and happier with each other. Now, some of you may say, well, it's a bit early. How can we determine? You know, we only just got our smartphones. We only just got connectivity. But the reality is it's not too early now to make some evaluations. In 1969, there was the first computer-to-computer communication at UCLA. Ironically, or perhaps not so ironically, it was a miscommunication. Many have followed since. We've had then almost 50 years of the internet, of computers being able to talk to one another. We've just celebrated the 25th anniversary of the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee, a British physicist, of course, invented the thing while he was doing his real job at CERN in Geneva in 1989. The real significance, by the way, of 1989 in future for historians won't be the fall of the Berlin Wall, which in some ways, of course, is very significant, particularly if you're German. It will be the foundation of the creation of the web. In an odd way, people talked about 1989 as the end of the Cold War and the end of the 20th century, perhaps. But the reality of 1989 represents the beginning of the 21st century. So, lots of promises. Has this thing lived up to its promise? And in my book, I conclude, unfortunately, that it hasn't. One of the great promises of this revolution was because of its distributed technology, and you hear a lot about that, how it changes all the hierarchies, the top-down nature of communication is substituted with a distributed nature where there's no center, where everything is the edge. The edge becomes, if you like, the operating system. That somehow would be represented in the real world. That the world would become like the edge, that the old hierarchies of the industrial system, the old top-down system from communication to media would be replaced by more democracy, more opportunity, fewer monopolies, fewer oligarchies, fewer big banks, fewer big media companies, fewer big universities, and more empowerment of everyone. Now, ironically enough, or again, perhaps not so ironically, what I report, and I'm not the first person to report on this, by the way, is what I might call an iron law of digital economics. The reality of this new economy is a winner-take-all economy. It's not because the Googles and the Facebooks and the Bitcoins and the Airbnbs and the Ubers are bad. It's not because they're evil. They're not Big Brother. The reality is that the nature of the digital economy, in spite of its distributed architecture, lends itself to greater and greater monopolies. The reality then of this market, of this great technological change, is it's creating huge global monopolies. There's now something called big tech, which is bigger in many ways than big tobacco or big chemical or big media. We see it, of course, above all else with the leading companies in Silicon Valley, like Google and Facebook and Apple. Google and Apple are two of the three most valuable companies in the world, the most profitable companies, both worth almost $1 trillion. Google, which is powerful not just in search, but in mapping, in Android, in this mobile platform, in video through YouTube. So what we're seeing, ironically enough, in spite of the distributed nature of the architecture of this new technology, are new monopolies, new dominant companies that are actually doing away with competition. When you think back in the mid-90s, at the beginning of this revolution, we had Microsoft, which was a monopolist. But Google is much more powerful, much richer, much more global than Microsoft ever was. So the first disappointment, and this is not a human disappointment, this is simply a reality of this architecture. It's an iron law of economic development without a human cause. The reality is of more and more monopolies, less competition. Now, some people think that's good. Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley entrepreneur, investor, founder of PayPal, very brilliant investor, says it's good, we want monopolies. I don't want monopolies. Monopolies are bad for entrepreneurs. Monopolies are bad for society. They exploit people. They're ultimately inefficient. So I think that's one reason why at the moment the internet is not the answer. Now, we heard earlier about jobs. We had a guy up here talking about the challenge of jobs. This is one of the great crises. Again, it's not the fault of the internet or even the technologists. They believe, like Licklider and Berners-Lee, they thought they would create jobs. They thought that this would create opportunity. Of course, in some ways, it has done. There's no doubt that some of you may have jobs as digital developers. There's no doubt there is such a thing as an app economy. There is no doubt that Silicon Valley does employ people. But the reality in this shift from an industrial world to a digital world, that digital is destroying jobs. Mark Andreessen famously said, Mark Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, the most influential investor now in Silicon Valley, he famously said, software is eating the world, which is a kind of euphemism. The reality is that software is eating jobs. In my book, I have parallel chapters, one on Kodak. I know there were some references to Kodak earlier in this week. Kodak, the classic, the quintessential industrial company, employed 135,000 people who worked in factories and research labs to create physical things. The Kodak moment lasted throughout the 20th century. It wasn't an ideal company. In many ways, it was a monopolist. I'm not idealizing it, but it was a perfect example of the kind of industrial company that employed large amounts of people and created physical things, which were then sold in a traditional economy. Now, at the very moment, a couple of years ago, when Kodak was going bust, and by the way, Kodak probably deserved to go bust. It was stupid enough, it missed the digital revolution. It, ironically enough, invented the digital camera and then didn't know what to do with it. Classic example of the innovator's dilemma. Instagram, which of course is in some ways symbolically and otherwise a replacement for Kodak, was acquired by Facebook for $1 billion. Classic acquisition. Some of you may say, well, what's wrong with that? The new replaces the old, and you'd be right. But there's a fundamental statistic that you need to bear in mind about this new replacing the old. Kodak employed 135,000 people in factories. It was the core, the heart of a working-class city like Rochester in New York. Instagram, when it was acquired by Facebook for $1 billion, and had its offices. It didn't even have offices. I think the kids worked out of cafes, classic way of in South Park, in downtown in Soma in San Francisco. It employed 15 people, 15 people. That seemed outrageous at the time. And then a year later, Facebook spent $20 billion on WhatsApp. Now, even for you guys in the banking industry, $20 million is a lot of money. And that 20 billion bought a company that employed 55 people. Where are the jobs going? Here's the tragedy. The jobs are not being created. We see it right across this industry. Google, which is almost $1 trillion company, only employs 40,000 people. Compared to the old industrial giants, that's catastrophic. Facebook's the same. Throughout this industry, this digital economy is not creating core jobs. It reflects the hollowing out of the middle, the hollowing out of an old middle class, of experts, of factory workers. And we're going to see the catastrophe of jobs now pick up pace. We're going to see it with self-driving cars and its impact on the driving economy. We're going to see it above all else with artificial intelligence and its impact on the traditional elite information businesses of the 20th century, on law, on medicine, on teaching, indeed in the banking industry. Much human expertise is being replaced by artificial intelligence. This is a catastrophe. It's no one's fault, but it's a reality now. We can come up with all sorts of explanations, but the reality, and someone will always stick up their hand and say, oh, well, aren't you a bit of a pessimist? Every revolution always destroys the old, and every revolution has created jobs. It's true about the Industrial Revolution, but that's an article of faith. There's no rational reason why this revolution is going to create jobs. This is a fundamental issue, fundamental problem that we've all got to confront. We have to address this huge issue of what are we all going to do in a world where you have more and more intelligent devices, machines, networked machines, which have replaced us in terms of their intelligence, their ability to create value. In the long term, of course, it creates an economic crisis because without us spending our money, as Marx famously said in the 19th century, there's no economy. But it gets worse in terms of the internet not being the answer. There's an even bigger problem when it comes to rights. We were told that this would empower us as consumers, that this would make us stronger, that we would be able to self-publish, that we could work our way around media companies. We were told that by having these networks, we would free ourselves from the information economy. Google famously says information is free. Now you don't have to pay for information. Facebook, through WhatsApp, has essentially replaced cellular companies. Twitter replaces the newspapers, and so on and so forth. But there's a core problem, a Kafka-like problem at the heart of this, which people are still not willing to address. Now, when you think about Instagram selling to Facebook for $1 billion and only employing 15 people, you think to yourself, how is that possible? How could a company create so much value and only employ 15 people? The reality, of course, is that the value of Instagram was not created by those 15 people. Sure, they created a good platform to allow people to upload their photos and swap those photos, but the core value was created by all of us. Instagram was worth so much money because of all its users. And those users were using the platform to distribute their products freely. The same is true of WhatsApp. The reason why WhatsApp has so much value is not the technology, which is good, is because it had 500 million users. That's why Mark Zuckerberg wrote a check for $20 billion. The reason why Facebook is so valuable, why it's almost worth $500 billion on the markets, is because of all the posts we put up. They're all free. So you think to yourself, well, this is great, this is empowering, this is a perfect economy. We get these wonderful products for free, and they are wonderful, whether it's the Google search engine or the Facebook social network, they're free. Everyone wins, win, 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 the classic expression out of Silicon Valley. But the reality, of course, is something else. The reality is that we all lose. The reality is that the economics, and here's the core issue, this is an economic issue, an economic debate. It's not about culture. The economics of this are what is really troubling, because these are, of course, all big data companies. Their value is in the acquisition of our data. Google's over 95, 96, maybe even 97% of Google's revenue comes from advertising. And Google's value as an advertising company, or Facebook's value as an advertising company, or Instagram's value as an advertising company, or WhatsApp's value as an advertising company, all these are free services, is derived from their acquisition of our data. The reality then, and this is what the financial industry needs to bear in mind, because you guys have been always very good at charging for things. Don't get seduced by the economics of free. They're a fundamental delusion, and they're deeply dangerous, both for your industry and for society. Because the problem is that the core business model of the digital society at the moment, to quote Bruce Schneier, very well-respected security analyst in Silicon Valley, the core business model is surveillance. We get watched. They get our data. They sell our data in sophisticated ways. Now, if someone from Google or Facebook was here, they would say, well, we don't really sell your data. They do. Sure, it's metadata. Sure, it's a little bit more complicated than perhaps some of the alarmists are articulating. But nonetheless, we have become the product. We are being dressed up as the product. And you cannot fall into that in the financial industry. You have been very skilled at charging for your products. Don't give stuff out for free, because then you'll realize the only way to make money is by selling your users' data. And this is all kind of bound up in the culture of user empowerment. The internet user demands everything for free, doesn't feel it has any obligation to pay for anything, and indeed when it's supposed to pay, they steal. The problem is that these people have been spoiled. We have a culture of rights rather than responsibilities, but it's the user who loses because they're falling into the trap of this surveillance economy. And it's going to get worse, a lot worse, with the Internet of Things, where everything gets connected, where we're riding around in these data machines, where our cities become data machines, where our homes through Nest are data machines. Everywhere will be the collection of data. It's not for the benefit of mankind, it's for the benefit of these new monopolists. So imagine that. And it's not hard to imagine. Look at Google, massive investment in artificial intelligence, acquired Nest, investing hugely in self-driving cars, not for the benefit of mankind, not because it cares about the environment. Maybe there are benefits of self-driving cars because they want our data. Finally, what about culture? Well, it's supposed to reflect a cultural renaissance. The internet was supposed to be the answer for better news, more reliable information. Give everybody the opportunity to articulate stuff for themselves. But the reality, of course, over the last 20 years has been a catastrophe for professional creatives. We've had the decimation of the music industry. 50% of the revenue of the recorded music industry has been lost over the last 20 years. Every week there's a new newspaper shutting. Photographers have been hit. So when it comes to creative content, when it comes to reliable content, the disintermediation which this network has done has actually resulted in empowering people like Putin and ISIS, who use this anarchy, this distributed system, to put out their propaganda. So don't believe people who tell us that culture is more reliable, more honest, more democratic. If anything, it's more of a blockbuster economy, and it's run increasingly by dark, evil people who put their suicide stuff up on, their suicide videos up on YouTube, and who employ buildings full of people in Moscow to articulate lies which get them put on the network. So what's to be done? Very, very briefly, this is a big problem. This isn't going to go away on its own. Blockchain will not solve this. Technology doesn't solve it. The problem isn't technology. The problem is business models, the problems are greed, and the problems of our unwillingness to confront the reality of this economy, which we are the ones who are being packaged up. We are the ones who are being exploited. We need regulators. We need people like Margaret Vestager in the EU who's going after these new monopolies. That's a good thing. But we can't just rely on government regulation. We need corporate regulation. We need people like Mark Benioff and Salesforce and other more grown-up people in Silicon Valley who are beginning to get the problems, take responsibility for this revolution in the same way as the industrial barons of the 19th century took responsibility for their revolution. And we need self-responsibility. We have to treat this revolution like grown-ups. The internet, the digital network, wasn't delivered to us like a stork in the middle of the night as a reward for our good behavior. It's not ours. It was created, as I explain in my book, by the US Defense Department, by universities, as a reaction to the Cold War, lots of concrete reasons. It required huge investment from the state. It wasn't ours, and it never is ours. Until we get beyond this culture of rights, where we think we have no obligation to pay, where we don't believe that these new companies, or we fall into the trap of being seduced, I think, by the very clever PR of these new companies, we are going to deepen the problem. The internet currently is not the answer. It's not working. The digital revolution, sure, it's delivered lots of stuff. I could spend another hour here telling you how I use email, why it's great, why it's empowering. All those things go without saying, and you can read hundreds of books on them. But at the moment, for the core issues of economic democracy, of jobs, of individual rights, of cultural richness, the internet isn't working. It's not the answer. It has to be the answer. We've got to acknowledge that. And perhaps when more mature industries like the financial industry get involved in this, you can help make it the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was indeed a positive note, I think, to end on. One of the words that you mentioned towards the end there was responsibility. And I think that's an important thing to take into consideration. We're going to keep innovating. FinTech is obviously important and presumably here to stay, but maybe we need to take a bit more responsibility. So thank you. I had the easiest job for the week. I basically give out a few thank yous, thanking you all, and wrap up today. It's been an amazing week here in Innotribe. I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you that, but we do have a video to share with you that's going to do a nice little wrap up. So check this out.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Innotribe at Sibos. Welcome to our 7th year of Innotribe at Sibos. Over the past 7 years, we've strived to bring forward-looking content that makes sense to the financial industry. We're now here on the main floor, and we've got a packed program for you this week.
Now we are at the core of the exhibition, first. And two, also at the core of the Swift strategy. If you look at my title, for whatever that means, the only thing that is important there is that Innotribe is working with market management.
The Economist this last week had an article that lamented the fact that we haven't moved away from traditional money more quickly. Are we at a real inflection point now in the transformation of money and the way that we will actually use currencies in the future?
We were slightly busy yesterday. This is some pictures from our New Kids on the Blockchain session. We weren't only full here, but we overtook the Swift stand as well. So we did a nice stress test on the Swift stand this morning. I think we put a few dents in the understructure, but it held. So thank you very much for making that really successful.
What we've got to figure out, and that's part of what discussions today and the rest of the week will be about, is how do we get collaboration among these very focused small companies that are really changing the world through different paradigms of technology and innovation than the big companies have. And how do we then get this collaboration to help really change the world?
What you are here and what you are part of is a phenomenal experience. You're all about technology and creativity. And the ability to use technology to transform people's lives, because financial security is the main thing that is necessary for people to be secure and stable.
Thanks to everybody here on the conference floor and everywhere around. We got through 3,000 cups of coffee yesterday. So there's still another 5,000 to go, so keep on keeping them busy, but I hope you're enjoying it.
What Matthias has just sketched out is participation commerce.
Yeah.
That is a participation commerce use case. This is not rocket science. It's about the design. It's about how do you design these things? How do you implement them? Where do you start? What is the use case? This is not rocket science. It's why we have to lead with strategy. The technology is the enabler, but you have to lead with human brain power.
As you can see, it's been a fantastic week. I hope that you've all enjoyed it. I would like to point out a couple of highlights that are very personal to me over the past week. In the video, it was mentioned the blockchain session, the New Kids on the Blockchain on Monday. Obviously, this room was completely overflowing. So we had an overflow area on the Swift stand, and that was overflowing, which was incredible to see. In terms of numbers, the Future of Money session that was on Monday had 622 people in the room. There was only one other session this week for Sibos as a whole that had more than that, and that was the big issue debate on Tuesday, which was all about Internet of Things. So obviously there's a very popular theme going on here. FinTech and technology is extremely important. Now I'd like to just take a moment to make a few very personal thank yous. There's obviously a lot of people that have gone into putting everything that you see here on this week, making it all work, making it all run. But there is a core Swift team behind this. So I'd just like to offer a personal thank you to them. There's Peter Van der Wera, Kevin Johnson, Fabio Maffioli, Audrey Rass, and Evangelina Lowe. So thank you for them. And the pressure's now on for next year, guys. So we have reached the end of the week, and that noise there is indicating what's coming up next. There's only one bit of business left at Sibos. That's the closing plenary. It's taking place in about 10 minutes. Upstairs on the fifth floor. There is a FinTech connection because the keynote speaker is Ravi Menon, who's the Managing Director of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and he's going to be sharing his highlights on a variety of topics, including trends in global fintech. So encourage you all to get up there and have a listen. There's also the closing event party tonight at the aquarium, so I encourage you all to go. Otherwise, thank you for being a great audience, and see you next year in Geneva.